In the biggest breakthrough so far on the COVID-19 vaccine, the Pfizer COVID vaccine has been approved for use in the United Kingdom for emergency use. The British government says it will begin vaccinating people from next week itself. Pfizer is an American pharmaceutical company that has tied up with BioNTech, and it currently is awaiting approval in the United States as well. This vaccine could well be the first step towards trying to find a way to end the COVID pandemic. It's our top story tonight.
The MHRA has formally authorised the Pfizer vaccine for COVID-19.
United Kingdom gives Pfizer vaccine a shot. It has become the first Western country to approve a COVID-19 vaccine for its citizens. British citizens will be vaccinated from next week.
The vaccine will begin to be made available across the UK from next week. I would like to pay tribute to and to thank all those who have made this possible. It is the protection of vaccines that will ultimately allow us to reclaim our lives and get our economy moving again.
In the first week, 8 lakh doses will be given to care home residents, healthcare staff, elderly and clinically vulnerable.
We have started immediately the process of delivering our vaccine.
The biggest challenge for the UK will be storage of Pfizer vaccine. The vaccine will be shipped in containers that resemble pizza boxes. These reusable containers can maintain the temperature at -70 degrees Celsius. At the vaccination centre, the vaccines will be stored in refrigerators. The vaccine can be kept at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius for 5 days. But Londoners remain sceptical about using the vaccine.
Personally, I would not want to take it because I think things are happening too quickly.
There hasn't been enough time to even find out if these vaccines are safe. I don't believe that they will be safe for the people, and I think there's a bigger, higher agenda behind it.
To people like us, this vaccine actually will be reaching out anytime soon because there are only 40 million doses that the UK has secured, 10 million on the way by the end of the month, but still not enough for everybody here in the whole UK population. But then Oxford Jenner is very close in the queue, so one is hopeful with fingers crossed that by the time Pfizer rolls it out next week, Oxford Jenner will be approved by the regulators, which is easier to administer and cheaper.
With Lavina Tandon, Bureau Report, India Today.
So is this the big news that the world has been waiting for, and what does it mean for India? That's going to be the focus tonight. Will a vaccine really end the COVID pandemic? Is it possible to achieve herd immunity without the vaccine? Which vaccine is safe? An mRNA vaccine like Pfizer or a viral vector vaccine? Are the rich nations going to corner the vaccine? And that's going to be a big question that we'll raise tonight. I'm joined by Dr. K. Srinath Reddy, President PHFI, the Public Health Foundation of India, and one of India's leading doctors. I'm also joined from by Dr. Vikram Talaulikar. He's a doctor and part of the Oxford vaccine human trial and an associate specialist at the University College in London. He'll give us a view from London. Also joining me is Dr. Gifty Emmanuel. He is virologist and director of medical services at Synergia Foundation in Bangalore. Appreciate all of you joining us. Dr. Reddy, to you first. How should we view the Pfizer announcement? Because many believe that this vaccine is really only suited for the Western countries. It's very expensive. It requires a cold storage chain that goes up to -70 degrees is where the vaccine will need to be stored. Do you believe that the Pfizer vaccine holds out hope to the world, or for now only to the Western countries that are already ordering it in large amounts?
Well, it's a great success for science. It is possibly a good success as far as public health strategies in UK, Europe, and the United States are concerned. But it's unlikely to change the course of the epidemic in most of the world, because this has very serious requirements of sub-zero temperatures, -70, which is going to be very difficult for most countries to meet, apart from the expense. So yes, it is an advance in science, but not necessarily in global public health. But it might show the way to other vaccines which may be more affordable, and more easy to administer.
So are we therefore, Dr. Reddy, talking about in a way of a two-stage process where the Western world gets the vaccines like the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine? UK has ordered 40 million doses. The US has ordered 100 million doses. Europe, 200 million doses. The production company is 50 million for 2020, 1.3 billion doses in 2021. We already have in UK COVID vaccine doses per citizen being booked. 5 in UK, US is 4.88, EU is 3.33. Doses needed per person is 2. So given that, are we going to see the Western world, as I said earlier, cornering this vaccine, and then the rest of the world will simply have to wait for a viral vector vaccine which is cheaper to come out?
Certainly, we have to look at safety and efficacy of any vaccine that comes out, and then look at the logistics involved in terms of storage and transport, and then look at the price. All of them are important. And I think, given the fact that the two mRNA vaccines are going to pose considerable challenges in logistics, we ought to be really looking at other vaccines. Some of them may not be far too long in coming, and we hope that they will be able to supply a good part of the world, including India. And since some of these vaccines are actually being manufactured in India, of course, they still have to pass the trials, then there is a great chance of India being able to get a reasonable amount of supply as soon as they get the regulatory clearance. But certainly, as far as the mRNA vaccines are concerned, they seem to be more intended for the Western world.
You know, let me come to those mRNA vaccines, because Dr. Vikram Talwalkar, you are working with the Oxford vaccine team, which is doing the more traditional system of getting in vaccines. But the mRNA vaccines, both Moderna and now Pfizer, appear to have changed the rules of the vaccine game. How confident are you of the safety and efficacy, given that particularly Moderna has no experience in vaccine production in the past? Are the mRNA vaccines safe according to you?
Hi, Rajdeep. Thanks to you and team for inviting me on the show. I think we have to remember this day as a great day for science and mankind. I think the vaccines are safe. I know that mRNA vaccines haven't been used for mass vaccination programs before. So this is really going to be the first of the mRNA vaccines, which is going to be mass produced and given to millions and billions of people. But I think none of the vaccines have really gone through to this stage without being tested for efficacy and safety. So although people feel corners have been cut or things have been rushed through, it's not the case. It's really a credit and salute to the scientists that even less than 12 months of this disease being discovered, we now have access to a vaccine that's as effective as 95%. And with more than 40,000 volunteers not having any significant side effect, just minor side effects, just like fever or malaise, which can be dealt with common medicines, this is a significant achievement. So we ought to be really proud of this. And this is definitely the beginning of end of this pandemic. We've got a long way to go, but this is really the first step towards it.
I'll come to that, whether it's the beginning of the end. If you could, for a moment, Dr. Talwalkar, explain to our viewers the difference between the mRNA vaccine and the vaccines that you and others are working on, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. What's the big difference?
So I think mRNA is really where it's basically a genetic piece of the virus. It's it's artificially produced genetic code of the virus. That's the mRNA. That's being injected into people as a vaccine. That then goes into the cells of the human body, starts producing certain proteins or certain parts of the virus, which then stimulate the antibodies and the T lymphocytes, which are going to mount an immune reaction. If you compare that to the traditional way of making vaccine, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, that relies on a vector, which means that relies on a vehicle. So you have a different virus, an adenovirus, which is then joined with a protein part, or the spike protein as we call it, of the COVID, that's actually superimposed on that inert adenovirus, and that's being injected as part of the vaccine. So the spike protein stimulates the immunity, both the antibodies as well as the long-term T lymphocytes. Right. So it's the short-term and the long-term immune response. That's the key difference You have a genetic code which is artificially produced being injected, and you've got the actual inert virus superimposed with the COVID virus protein.
But your sense, both equally safe? I know the mRNA vaccine much more expensive, but is it equally safe, Dr. Talaulikar?
Yes. Again, as I said, this is going to be unprecedented. We are using these vaccines for the first time, the mRNA ones. The traditional vaccines, there are many diseases for which we use them. But so far, all the trial results, not just for COVID mRNA, but many other mRNA vaccines, as well as this one, which has been tried in more than 40,000 volunteers, the safety profile is excellent. And so there should be no concern in going forward and having this vaccination.
Okay.
But the key remains is that if you look at the mRNA vaccine versus the Oxford vaccine, which is the traditional, there are significant advantages for the Oxford vaccine if you look at the future for countries like India or rest of the world. As we know, it's less price, it's about 1/10 of the price, it's much more stable at room temperature, and it uses half and full dose, which means it can be given to larger number of participants. So I think if you start with mRNA, get a good grip on the virus in as many countries as we can, the future then belongs to other vaccines taking over that job, like the Oxford or the other vaccines which are being done by ICMR and all the others.
That's very interesting the way you're putting it, that first you'll have the Western world, which now starting next week will have the opportunity or the option to use the mRNA vaccines, and then the vector viral vaccines, which are cheaper, room temperature, could be used in countries like India. But Dr. Gipti Emmanuel, you are a virologist, Director of Medical Services at Synergia Foundation, Bangalore. You seem to believe that all this focus on vaccines, this fast forwarding of vaccines is actually dangerous. You want to give us some cautionary signals, is it?
Definitely. Rajdeep, thanks for having me on the show. To begin with, the amazing vaccine metrics are coming out, 95%, 94, 92, and values which are out of this world. I'm really happy, but this should be not euphoria. It should be really translating into clinical success. To begin with, the mRNA is a molecule which goes into the human body and presents the antigen to the immune system, and our immune system produces antibody against this particular antigens or the virus component. But mRNA by itself, innately, it's a highly fragile molecule. That is why it's stored at minus 70 degrees. And when it's injected into the body, it's quite likely that mRNA could be disrupted before it enters the cell. And what we are seeing as a very high immune reaction could be a non-specific inflammatory reaction, which could be understood as vaccine-induced immunity. There is a little difference between both of them. So this is basically a failed technology as far as cytomegalovirus and influenza are concerned. They were tried before. It is not a proven methodology. Still, it has been accepted in the UK, but we do not know what are the long-term side effects or the long-term efficacy to begin with of this vaccine.
So are you telling me that you don't go along with this 95% efficacy figures? In the case of Moderna, talk of 100% for severely affected COVID patients? You believe that you need to press the pause button?
Yes, I'm only saying in science you need to evaluate and constantly re-evaluate even if you get positive results, if it's an artifact or a real result. In the sense, this kind of results can come even if there is a non-specific inflammatory reaction. Even if you inject any kind of protein, there will be an inflammatory reaction, and that can show kind of rapid response. But does it clinically protect the patient from acquiring COVID is the big question. So
that's the question I want. That's the question I want to ask you, Dr. Reddy, because there are concerns. A, how long will the immunity last? Even if I get vaccinated with the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, or indeed with Oxford AstraZeneca, as and when it gets approved, how long will the immunity last is one of the concerns. And as is being suggested there by Dr. Gillies, that is there a concern at all that perhaps we are rushing through with these vaccines?
Firstly, Rajdeep, while the previous attempts at mRNA vaccines were not very successful because of the fragility of the mRNA once introduced into the body, recent techniques have actually ensured that the mRNA can actually be safely introduced and can produce, before the human body cells break it down, an immune response, at least in terms of getting the protein synthesized, because the purpose of mRNA is to instruct the other cellular constituents, the ribosomes, to produce a particular protein, in this case, the spike protein. And that job seems to have been done well with the more modern techniques that have actually improved upon the earlier techniques. But even in the trials, it's not just the immunogenicity that's being assessed. It is actually the number of people who are demonstrating infection in the immunized group versus the non-immunized group. That is the clinical outcome that is being assessed. So to that extent, I think the regulators have checked not just the mechanistic pathway of immunogenicity, but the clinical outcome, and they're quite convinced that this has succeeded.
But what the regulator cannot, with due regard, doctor, what presumably the regulator cannot say at this stage is how long will the immunity last?
Sure, certainly. No, that is not really known. The antibodies themselves seem to be disappearing in about 3 months. There is some evidence that the T-cell immunity may last 6 months or longer. We do not know. The answers are still not there. But the idea here is that if you can protect the vulnerable, and the UK is actually going in first for the care homes, who are at great risk, the elderly. And secondly, if you can actually disrupt the chain of transmission, even a 6-month immunity may be able to do that in such a fast-spreading infection. But certainly this may not be the only way in which this pandemic will end. But it may be one method of trying to get control at this stage.
You know, because Dr. Talaulikar, you know, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has already created some doubts by the half dose, full dose that you're talking about, that you take a half dose first and you take a full dose later and you get 90% efficacy. If you take a double dose, it's about 62%. Now, many are wondering, can this actually work? Is that how Oxford is going to go ahead with a half dose, full dose? We are told that Pfizer is going to be 2 full doses. I'm not clear about the Russian vaccine, whether it's going to be a 2-dose vaccine, but the general belief is most vaccines are 2-dose. So where does the half dose, full dose fit in?
Yes, again, I think we have to concentrate on the positive and the data here. There has been a lot of confusion about the 2 doses, whether the 2 full doses or the 1 half and 1 full dose, and the success rates of each. I think anything more than 50% of the protection rate was usually the benchmark. So I think both sort of regimes, whether it's the 2 full doses or a half and a full, have done very well. An efficacy of more than 60-70%, first of all, is really, really good. Now, out of the 2, though, when we discovered that there were these 2 regimes used, and the half and the full dose gives better protection, scientists are still trying to work out what could be the underlying mechanism. It's thought that the first dose primes the immune system, just like more of a natural infection for the first time, and the second dose then actually causes quite a strong immune response, which is why the percentage of the numbers were better.
And if I may ask you, how soon, Dr. Talaulikar, do you expect it to be, is Oxford AstraZeneca going to be in a position to look for emergency approvals? Because remember, Serum Institute in India has tied up with them, and the hope is that once it gets emergency approvals in the UK, maybe the Indian Serum Institute can also look for approvals. How soon do you see that process now?
I think they're already in the process of filing for regulatory approval. That process is, I think, almost underway now. So we should be hearing about their approval status within the next few weeks. The aim is if they can then actually go on to have approval by December, January, then the rollout of the vaccine should happen in January, February. So the first quarter for sure.
You know, Dr. Gifty Emmanuel, as you're hearing these voices who seem much more euphoric than you at the moment, you know, are you concerned that within hours of Pfizer making this announcement or the UK government making the announcement, you've got Boris Johnson saying, look, I'm going to vaccinate my people with the Sputnik V vaccine from next week? This vaccine nationalism, is that also what worries you?
Definitely, but because I think it's a kind of a rat race at the scientific level, with each country kind of making the vaccine their brand ambassador and their universal message to others that they are able to scientifically produce a vaccine which is going to protect and things like that. But to begin with, the Oxford vaccine and the Russian vaccines have been using very old platforms of adenoviral vector. The disadvantage of using an adenoviral vector is the human immune system will destroy it before the payload of the virus components are released to the system. So that is one disadvantage we need to overcome. And as you rightly pointed out, the paradox of immunity, when half a dose was given, the immune response was 90%. When the full dose was given, it was only 72%. That means to say even the vaccine designers don't understand the metrics of immune response so well within such a short time. And the waning immunity is a huge issue with all vaccines at this moment, because if it doesn't even sustain for 8 months in a year, it's very difficult even to go for the annual booster scheme. So every vaccine needs to be boosted. We are not sure if it's a single dose or a double dose. The primary dose is a prime and boost double dose. So all these things do matter. How long does it protect? And the biggest picture is once you start vaccinating, there will be a selection pressure on the entire human population, and viruses will start mutating. This is against one particular strain of virus. For example, its component or the spike protein or the envelope protein is taken, synthesized, and presented to the immune system. Suppose we have a vaccine escape mutant or a super wild virus, this can always infect despite the vaccination.
Let me get a final word from you, Dr. Reddy, then. From an Indian perspective, how should we see this news of Pfizer having seemingly cracked it, getting through the regulatory approvals, and the UK authorities are known to be strict? Does that mean that we could get the vaccine in some form in India sooner rather than later? We are not, we haven't ordered Pfizer vaccines. Should we be in line for that as well? Or should we keep our attention on the indigenous vaccines and on Oxford AstraZeneca?
Well, I don't think we should be really importing Pfizer vaccine except maybe in very small quantities for very special uses. But I think we should actually wait for the other vaccines to succeed, which are more dependable in terms of their storage and transport characteristics, easier in terms of logistics, and also better priced, and are likely to be available in bulk quantity. And it's better to let the Western world compete for these vaccines, mRNA vaccines, and then so that when the other vaccines come out successful, they are no longer really trying to grab them, and we may be actually better off. Okay. But certainly our ability to produce the vaccines in India at large scale and at low price will stand an advantage. But I certainly agree that science is paramount. We have to very carefully weigh all the evidence, first of safety, then of efficacy, then look at logistics, and then finally go to the price.
That's very well put, Dr. Reddy. Clearly, all three of you have given us a perspective which hopefully breaks down the big announcement that has come today. That's what we try and do, explain the news for you here, news without the noise. Dr. Talwalkar, Dr. Gilfrey, and Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for joining me. And it's a good point on which, from the doctors here, to turn to another special guest, because remember, the World Health Organization is also closely now looking at the vaccine announcements. Remember, many countries in the Western world have gone ahead, signed contracts with pharma companies like Pfizer, like Moderna, and already pre-ordered these potential coronavirus vaccines. Where does this leave the lesser income countries? What is the World Health Organization going to do, especially its COVAX program that aims to bring governments and vaccine manufacturers together to ensure equitable access to the COVID-19 vaccine? India's Serum Institute is also part of this multi-nation program that has over 184 participant countries. The aim is to secure nearly 2 billion doses by the end of next year. So far, the alliance has procured 740 million doses. What does all this mean? I'm joined by another special guest. Joining me now from the Chief Scientist's Office at the World Health Organization is one of the leading immunologists at the World Health Organization, Dr. Vasi Murthy. Joins me. Appreciate your joining us, Dr. Murthy. Lots of buzz in the past few days on the vaccine, from Pfizer to Moderna to Russian Sputnik V to AstraZeneca. Is the buzz taking away from some of the realities? Should we be pressing the pause button, as some WHO scientists, including your Director General, suggested that this is not a silver bullet? Don't get carried away by getting too excited too soon.
Thank you for inviting me on, first of all. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yes, I think the news so far is positive, but it's important that we don't get carried away. It's really early days. Let's bear in mind that all of this information is interim. So these are interim findings. What that means is that full results are not available. We need to wait for those full results. And then the process is that they need to be submitted to the regulatory authorities. And it is they that will have access to all the information. All we have is some preliminary results that have been interim results that have been disclosed by these companies. But let's also acknowledge that it's amazing that we've got to this point in only 11 months since so many companies have started their clinical trials, started the beginning of development. There are 48 different vaccines on our WHO landscape of COVID-19 vaccines in clinical testing, and over 150 before that. So it's great that we've got to this point, but there's still quite a long way to go.
The critical question, and I think this is particularly true for India, Dr. Murthy, is ensuring equitable distribution of the vaccine to all countries and to those who are most at risk. Is the World Health Organization worried that the UKs and the US and the EUs are already starting to monopolize the vaccine in these early months, and there is a need for some kind of a global regimen like COVAX to ensure that the vaccine is equitably distributed to countries like India?
Yeah, this is a core consideration for us at WHO, and it should be for everyone in the world. We cannot afford a situation where only certain countries or certain groups are receiving access according to financial considerations. It's very important that the vaccine is used according to the need. And we have already provided some guidance on this, and it'll be for the national authorities to make decisions in their countries. But clearly, a couple of the important issues that should determine who gets vaccine are the risk factors for exposure. So healthcare workers are an absolute priority because of their exposure to risk, but also risk factors for severe disease. So the elderly, those with underlying health conditions would have greater risk of severe disease and poor outcomes. So these are two of the factors we think should be front and center in deciding who gets access to the vaccine.
You know, Dr. Murthy, the other question being asked is how will you ensure complete protective immunity against the virus? Do you believe that scientists have fully understood COVID-19 enough to ensure that taking a double dose of the vaccine will be enough to ensure protective immunity? As I said, the World Health Organization DG warning that there are no silver bullets. Just because you have a vaccine doesn't mean that the pandemic is over. Can the vaccines guarantee full protection in any form against the virus?
No, we cannot guarantee that. And that's one of the many areas where we don't have so much information at the moment. We have to be honest. And I think we should celebrate the major progress that has been made in science over the last 11 months. But we always have to be honest about what we know and what we don't know. What we know is advancing very rapidly. We're gaining information every week about how long antibodies last and what the risks are for individuals in different situations. But we do not know how long the immunity for after vaccination is going to last, and we don't know how complete it is. And if I could just add on the equitable access side, as I think everyone knows, I hope, we have a major initiative from WHO called the COVAX facility, part of something called the Act A Accelerator, because our Director General has made it clear that we have a major focus on ensuring equitable access. And so the COVAX facility is a way where countries can pool resources so that in addition to supporting their own populations, we can ensure that at a global level, there are pooling of risk and pooling of resources. And we think it's going to be critical that additional resources are found for this multilateral equitable access initiative.
A final question, Dr. Murthy, is that World Health Organization is using many different, is that vaccine manufacturers are using many different platforms. There's the protein vaccine, there's the mRNA vaccine of Pfizer, the viral vector vaccine of Oxford AstraZeneca. Do you believe that having these different platforms is useful at a time like this? Or are we still in some kind of an exploratory stage where we don't know which vaccine exactly will work best for COVID-19 or possibly for countries like India in particular?
So that's a very good question. Clearly, we need as many different vaccines that are high quality, safe and effective and possible to deliver as possible. The answer is not going to come from one or two vaccines because there is no scenario where there will be enough supply anyway of one or two vaccines. So that's number one message. We need a basket of vaccines. Secondly, there are many of these different platforms, as you described. And in a way, from WHO's perspective, this goes back to some work from something called the WHO R&D Blueprint, which is our emerging infectious diseases R&D program, where we called for vaccine developers to prepare for what we call the disease X scenario. And this goes back to 2017, where we had a prioritization of the diseases that were most likely to cause serious international outbreaks or pandemics. And we always highlighted that we didn't know for sure which disease was going to cause the next pandemic. And so we had this category of disease X, which was intended to really stimulate preparation of including vaccine developers for what happens if a new vaccine comes along. So if a new virus comes along, which hasn't caused disease in humans before. And so this SARS-CoV-2 really is the first example of disease X. And what you've seen is that all of the different technologies that we have in our armory are being applied here. And some of them are more novel. Some of them we have many examples of licensed vaccines. So mRNA is one of these novel approaches. The viral vectors are also more novel. In a way, we're neutral as to which of the platforms get used and delivered, because the critical issue is not so much the platform, but whether they are high quality, safe, effective, affordable, they can be scaled up and they can be delivered. What you've seen is that mRNA and the viral vector approaches, because this is Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, for example, and the Russian vaccine are all either viral vector or mRNA. These have been, as they were advertised to be, and as we hoped, they have been the quickest to actually get through the first part of development. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the ones that are there in 12 months' time that are forming the absolute basis of the rollout. So we have to be, I think, agnostic to the platform and just look at all of the factors that we need for public health value.
Dr. Murthy joining me there from Geneva, giving us that in-depth sense of what is happening on the ground and how you're looking at this vaccine race. Thanks very much for joining me on the news today.